Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We would like to take this opportunity to place our appreciation to the following partners and sponsors for making today's event a possibility. Our partners are Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hall Trust, Hindi Society Singapore, Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, and our sponsors are Jyoti Store and Flower Shop, Apollo Chelapa's Departmental Store and Jewelries, and Gokul Vegetarian Restaurant. With that, just another round of reminders. Strictly no recording of videography and audio throughout this session. The main reason is because we want this session to be as engaging as much as possible and free flow exchange of ideas and comments. So we really appreciate you're thoughtful in this. The second session will be a panel discussion with community speakers, and the session is chaired by Professor A. Mani from the Graduate School of Asia-Pacific Studies at the Ritsumeikan Asia-Pacific University in Japan. To commence the session, I would like to invite Professor A. Mani to give his introductory remarks and introduce the panel speakers.
Distinguished guests and friends, I'm very happy to chair this panel because we have 4 different perspectives from people who are involved with their respective communities as well as people who know about this area. In some way, it is a continuation of what we discussed in the earlier panel and yesterday. As you know, the first speaker is going to be Dr. Anita Devi Pillai. She's a lecturer in the NTU, and she will discuss on the Malayalis in Singapore, which is a very important community in Singapore. As you know, in 1970, when the British left, before that there were about 21,000 Malayalis in Singapore, in my memory. After the British left in 1980 census, it dropped to almost about 12,000, even slightly below the Sikh population of Punjabi population of Singapore. And I shared before I started this chairing, I told Anita Devi that one of the things I found in my fieldwork then in the 1970s was, all the Malayalis, including many Tamils, take oil bath on Saturdays. Now, when I interviewed the Mahalingam Mark Nalane Company, the Mahalingam Mark Nalane Company told me in 1980 that his sales went down so terribly simply because almost 10,000 Malayalis departed for England and Kerala. That's the significance on the market impact of shift in population. Fortunately, by 2000, the population of Malayalis has returned back to the old figure, and I think by 2010, it would have passed the original, even 1970 figure. So Anita Devi Pillai is going to cover a very interesting community that has played, as a community, very important role, especially in the naval-based area. In fact, there have been students in sociology department who have studied on the Malayali neighborhood. And of course, individual Malayalis have played very national roles in Singapore. So she will touch on this in 20 minutes. And then we have Mr. Subbaya Lakshmanan. I share with him also the interesting experience of, I don't know him personally, but I have also interviewed the Chettiars in Market Street, the Tirupathur Vellalas in Market Street, who ran all these money lending businesses. And he is going to share with us very interesting things about his experience, Indian businesses in Market and Malacca Street. And then we have Mr. Narayanan. He's very well known to many of us, and he will really take us through the so-called street from, say, Dhobi Ghat right up to Theka, which many of us who have grown up, including me, we have walked and we have experienced. And we know the feel of the place. Like just now when we talked about Little India, we missed the whole point. The Little India housed as part of its heyday, the best red light district in the whole of Southeast Asia. I remember when I went to do field work in Indonesia, my Indonesian friend, Malay friends will say, oh, you are Tamil from Singapore. You know Serangoon Road, Desker Road. Oh my goodness. I always tell them, when I was a kid in Serangoon Road, I used to walk on the opposite side of Serangoon Road, never on the other side, in case my friends mistake me that I went to the right-hand side. Anyway, that's the experience of living in Serangoon Road, right? I never went that side, so I had to walk Serangoon Road all the way to State Theatre. You know State Theatre? And to walk to State Theatre, never walk on the right-hand side. Walk on the left-hand side. Okay. Then we have Nasir Ghani. Again, Tamil Muslims are another favorite community of mine. And he represents the Kadinalur Muslim League. As you know, the Kadinalur Muslim League, instead of building a mosque, one of its chairmen built the leading Tamil secondary school, the only Tamil secondary school in whole of Southeast Asia. And because of that, we had a stream of teachers who were fluent in Tamil as a first language. So all these people are going to present us very dynamic Singapore. So without any wasting time, I'll invite Dr. Anita to contribute her presentation.
Good morning to one and all. Thank you very much for this invitation. I was actually thrilled to hear Professor Mani say I had 20 minutes. I turned to the ladies and they said, no, 10. So I'm going to make this as short as I can and keep to the time if I can, right? I'm going to be speaking about a topic that's close to my heart, Malayalis in Singapore. It's a topic of, that I've been researching on, and a lot of my early work, okay, maybe not early work, the last 5 years that I've been in academia, has been about Singaporean Malayalam. Could we go on to the next slide, please? I'm an applied linguist by training. So the lens that I place when I look at the community, as well as when I look at, mainly as well as when I look at the community, as well as when I look at the language, has it changed? What is the impact of the change? Why does it change? And if it hasn't changed, why not? Now, and in doing so, I did document Singaporean Malayalam, which is a sort of a variation of the language that was present amongst third-generation Malayalis predominantly. Now, that was the book was published in 2010. Now, things have changed tremendously, actually. And Prof. Mani rightly so pointed out that with a lot more Malayalis have come into the picture. So now, as I stand here, what I'm going to be talking to you about is I'm going to talk to you about the challenges we've had. And I'm going to, just present to you the current research study that I'm involved in. Because the challenge of being an applied linguist is that with a focus so much on the language, the linguistic aspects of the language, I merely start my research by saying, oh, Malayalis were in Singapore in 1930s to 1940s, because that's what Professor Turnbull has documented in Singapore history, right? Now, obviously, a lot of people have mentioned that not at all, Malayalis have been around a lot earlier, there are records of it, but it was difficult to find these records. And with a focus on that, I also realized that there were gaps in the research. And yesterday when Professor Prasenjit spoke, and he said, find the gaps, fill the gaps, find the narratives, and that's the voice of the generation and the people that you're looking at. So starting from the gap, starting from what is it and where did we come from and what has happened to the community? Is it merely Malayalis in Singapore, or is it the Singaporean Malayali? Two different entities, and hence I would call it narratives rather than a narrative itself about the community. Now, so I'll go on to show you some early records of the Malayalis that we were able to find as a team, as well as what were the starting points. There's a lot of anxieties, actually, when we started looking at the narratives of the Malayali community. There's anxieties of the new migrants, the anxieties of families who have been here for the last few generations, at least. Next slide, please. So some early records that we found. This is a forum letter that was written to the Straits Times, and one of the earliest records that we have found is that in 1917 itself, someone had talked about, in the context of a different discussion, of course, had talked about Telugus and Malayalis also being present in Singapore. Malayalis were documented as being present in Singapore in a Straits Times article in a discussion about the Indian population. Now, access to Malayalam language, that's the focus that I've always gone. And I think in order for a community to, and I really believe this strongly, that in order for a community to sustain itself, certainly culturally they would emerge, they would evolve, there would be a lot of assimilation that takes place, and it has, and certainly in the case of Singapore, rightly so, as we are multilinguals in the society. Now, it is language that holds the community together, not necessarily race, not necessarily religion for that matter. Oh, can you go back? Sorry. Yes. This is a picture. I mean, obviously, we're in the process of collecting pictures, but and I don't have the release from the participants yet, but this I certainly do, because it's a picture of my dad in the 1960s. I think I got the year right, in the Malayalam school. And he talks a lot about studying Malayalam and the sense of the community and the sense of identity that the community had in those days. Now, Malayalam language was available when I was growing up, but it was only available in some organizations and associations. It was not available in a big way. Hence, I've only got 5 minutes? Okay. Hence, one thing that certainly has happened is it's made me a lot more I'm certainly effectively bilingual in Tamil and English rather than Malayalam. I am unable to read and write, I'm embarrassed to say so, but also it was a matter of having access to it. The next slide, please. Having said that, Addie Ko, in a very, very early journal article, had mentioned that there were a few newspapers in Singapore, and I was surprised to see that apart from Chinese, Malay, and Tamil paper, Malayalam newspaper was also available. And I don't have time to go into the history, which I find fascinating, about Kerala Bandhu and Malaysian Malayali newspapers. But certainly, at a different platform, at a different place, I would like to focus more on that as well. Yeah. So the current project, then, let me just share with you what we're doing right now. Yeah, we're in the process of documenting the narratives of the Malayalis. We are interviewing them, looking at their lives, early Malayalis, first generation, second generation, third generation Malayalis, documenting their lives, documenting the perceptions. And I certainly would want to broaden the scope to not just looking at their language, which I think will evolve, will come out of it, will emerge, not evolve, emerge out of the data that we're going to be collecting. But certainly their identity and their role, and really their role in the Singaporean society. Professor Prasenjit also talked about not just looking within the community, what's the role they play amongst the Indian community in Singapore, what's the role they play and they continue to play, and how do they continue to change. So, well, there is obviously a story to be told, and that's a story I would like to tell. Thank you.
So we're all given just 10 minutes, so I won't waste time with a lot of introduction. Before I start my formal presentation, I want to do something else. I want to take you back in time, back to 1975, okay? So it will just take a minute. Close your eyes. Okay, it's just before lunch, the room is dark. I'm sure it's not difficult to do, okay? Now imagine, really close your eyes, imagine. You're going to take a leisurely stroll down an unknown street. As you take your first steps, you hear the call of the muezzin for prayer. Shadu an la ilaha illallah, Shadu an la ilaha illallah. You look to your right, and there's a crowd of bearded Muslim men in sarong and songkok hurrying to the mosque. As you pass them, on your right, you hear a money changer shouting, US dollar, pounds, US dollar, pounds. You then cross a small cross street with mild traffic. And on your right, you see shaven-headed men sitting on the floor, on low desks, bent over and writing open ledgers with total concentration, oblivious of all the traffic and noise outside. Okay, keep your eyes closed, imagine. Then you smell the sweet smell of cinnamon and cardamom, followed immediately by the pungent smells of garlic, onions, and other Indian provisions. As you turn your head away from the strong smell, you see a colorful sari shop across the street. bedecked with colorful, dazzling saris. Having feasted your eyes, you're accosted with the strong smell of roasted coffee and sweet tea. As the coffee smell fades away, your ears are irritated by the crushing and rolling sounds of an iron plate's mill. Kadak, kadak, kadak. You quickly dash across the street to escape the discomfort and run smack into a barber shop. And flour dust from the shop right next door floats your way with the burning smell of curry. You pinch your nose. Crossing a couple more banana leaf cafes, you come to the end of the street. You're lost. You're curious. Where are you? Where is this colorful place? You look up at the street sign to see where you are. Where are you? Any takers? Market Street. Okay, presentation please. Okay, so it's difficult to imagine, okay, but that's the Market Street. I grew up there till I was 12, and I think many of you here probably grew up there or went there often enough to identify, okay? Now, I have a lot of things to cover. I'm supposed to cover Market Street as well as Chettiar's. So I'm going to, but I think Chettiar's Rani Tan already did a very passionate job about it yesterday. So I won't cover too much about it. I'll try to complement what she says. But what I want to really cover on is Market Street as a micro India. Okay? I've given some talks on Chettiar's before, but this is completely new material that I've just prepared for this. And I need to thank my father and his friends for putting all the data together. Later, I have a map of Market Street with all the shops and the businesses. So they left Market Street in 1977. It's over 30, 40 years. And it's amazing they remember so much of the details. Okay? So if this is my first time, so I'm not so polished on this one, so I apologize for any errors and omissions. Okay. So Market Street basically consists of this area: Market Street, Chulia Street, Malacca Street, the Almeida Street, Raffles Place, Change Alley, and the Arcade. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is how, one by one line by one line. Okay, first there are 30 to 40 Indian businesses in those areas, 60 to 70% Indian firms. There were 400 to 500 Indians actually living there, 6 Chettiar Kitengis, 5 banana leaf restaurants and cafes, 1 sari shop, it's called Nalam Store, next, 2 Indian provision shops, 1 flour spice mill, next slide, 1 Indian barber shop, few spice trading houses, few tailor shops, 1 travel agency, Ganapat Ram, 1 medical shop, Latif Brothers, 1 stationery shop, Malayan Stationery, lawyers G. Raman and Murugesan, 1 money changer, at least, few ship chandlers, Wahab and Dawood and company, Kamaluddin. Okay, next. Okay, so this was a real business incubator for the Indian community. Okay, so many major businesses actually grew out from there. Mustafa Center started out as a textile shop. And before that, Muhammad Mustafa's father, he used to sell tea on the street corner with a tanda. He used to come at night and drink tea. And Siddiq, I don't know who's the owner of Mustafa, the main owner, he as a boy used to serve tea to people. So that is from anecdote from my father. Okay, so they started out from there. Next, Second Chance Tailors started out at Bonham Building. So they started Second Chance Gold Jewelry, and they are a listed company now. Next one. Nomanbai Commodity Traders, they were Gujarati traders, and that's where the spice mills come from. My most vivid memory of Market Street is that walking by that shop. I didn't have to do all those things like Serangan Road. I could walk on any side of the street. Syed Muhammad, they are still rice traders. They trade in pony rice. Okay, Mohan's Emporium, which was on Malacca Street. They used to have a big shop in Orchard Road before. Yeah. P. Govindasamy provision shop. He had a branch over at Market Street. Lee and Lee Law Firm, Malacca Street. That's where they started. And one of his first employees was a Chettiar. Later, maybe if I have time, I'll cover on that. And Tatley Bank and Iron Rolling Mill, they belong to Tatley, and they are basically the brothers of Mr. Lee. And they still own the property near there. Yeah, okay. Bonham Building, okay. In the neighborhood, there's a Bonham Building lawyers. There were lawyers in that building. Change Alley was full. Change Alley was the original Lucky Plaza, okay? There are lots of money changers, tourist shops, the ships and tourists who arrive will come there to do a lot of their shopping, okay? The arcade, okay, similar to a Change Alley. Raffles Place had a lot of itinerant vendors. And there was the Indian and UCO Bank and their staff, and there were audit firms, okay? So all of this really made it into a very much of an Indian area. When I grew up there, I thought of it as an Indian area primarily, especially Market Street. And it was known among local Tamils as Chetty Street. Okay? So in perspective, it was a self-sufficient Indian area with a clear identity as an Indian area. Chulia Street, I'm not sure whether others will dispute, but what I've been told is that it comes from the word Chola. So its associations with India is from the early days of settlement. Okay, Chetty Street, which is Market Street. In those days, according to my father, it was a one-stop shop. So the general itinerary for people visiting, or at least some people visiting, was to see the Chetty, get your haircut from the cheap barbers, have lunch and coffee at the Indian shops, buy provisions, settle any other businesses, just walk over to the Esplanade at 4 5 p.m., relax there and go back. Okay? So it was a mixed area. I think similar to the Singapore mix of Singapore Indians. There were Tamil, Hindus, Muslims, North Indians, and also Chinese. And other than this, I just wanted to highlight that there were other micro-Indias also, like the Naval Base area, Tanjong Pagar, Pasir Panjang, Changi, and maybe Arab Street too. Okay? Now, I'll just do one slide on the Chettiars, this, because I think Rani Tan has already done it. Yeah, you can just quickly slip through this. Just 1 second. Okay, so they are from India. Okay, they came here. Earliest date, I think, is about 1824. Their heyday was 1870 to 1930s. 1970s, their business died out. There were about 300 to 400 firms at the peak. Okay, and they were involved in all kinds of investments. Yeah, next please. Okay, and their clientele was everyone across the board. Okay, this slide a bit slower. Okay, prior to 1900s, Chettiars were almost the only source of capital for entrepreneurs and small business people. Especially if you're not established, it will be very difficult to go into Standard Chartered or anything. Okay? In Singapore, they did not take collateral and were not pawn shops. Okay? That was a Teochew business. Okay. Now, this is the one I wanted to mention because sometimes we use the word money lender, just 1 minute, just money lender, and it gives an idea of, as you said, loan shark or very unsophisticated bankers. Actually, Chettiars were doing the full service banking. They provided working capital loans and investment capitals as VCs, for rubber plantations, for tin mines, for real estate. Okay, they provided syndicated loans also. If the loan is too big, they'll share the risk. They took deposits with interest and safe kept the jewels and valuables in their lockers. They did fund transfers. It's like a hundi system between cities in Southeast Asia. They issued demand drafts and discounting of demand drafts. Okay, it was a full-service banking. Okay, next slide. Okay, I just want to show you this photo. This is not in Singapore, but that's kind of how it looks like. I have more photos later. I'll show during the Q&A. Next. Okay, you can just skip through this. Okay, see, we always see photos of Chettiar men everywhere, right? Museum everywhere. Okay, now the mysterious Chettiar woman looks like this. Okay. So, and one more photo, and that's it. Yeah. Okay, that's a couple. And okay, this I'll do later during the Q&A. Thank you.
This is just a throwback to the past. It was in 1911 that my father, as a 17-year-old, took a slow boat from Nagapattinam to come to Penang, and I guess he would have been clothed something like this. Probably rather more disheveled through a 6 or 7 day passage by deck on a ship. And I'm not sure whether he had a shirt, but he would have had this towel, which he could also use to wind around here, as was the custom in those days. So this is a custom there, and he came here as a 17-year-old, having failed his SSLC. He came to Singapore. The first visit to Singapore would have been in 1913. Luckily, this is this photograph he took on that day during the Chinese New Year holidays. So from a village hick, he's already transformed into a sort of a Edwardian young boy. Anyway, I'd intended to go on a totally different topic, but the previous speaker has gone a long way on the Chettiar community. He mentioned that they were known as loan sharks. I'm not sure whether all of you are aware that the term Along San apparently is because it refers to Along San is Talang Sang is the long earlobes of the year, and most of the Chettiars who were prosperous had diamond earrings. So normally the earlobe would have gone a long way there. So the origin of Talong San, or Along as it is today, is large earlobe. Apart from that, another factor is he mentioned Market Street as the focal point for the Chettiars. I think what has been, many people may not be aware that in those days, toilets were carried by hand. I've been taken out, there was no system as today. And the center of Raffles Place, until about 40 or 50 years ago, was a public lavatory. And that is where all the Indians, the Chettiars and the Cholias all used to go for their daily workouts. There's also the anecdotal thing that there used to be a thing called Jampan Churte. Churte, I think you all know churte, a cigarette. And Jampan Churte was to drive away the smell. And anyway, these are all historical records. Let me go on to the topic now. As I said, my eyes are dim, I cannot see. There's an old song, normally you start a prayer to God. My eyes are dim, I cannot see. Thank God I brought my specs with me. Those of us who travel from Singapore, between Singapore and India or any place today, are probably unaware of what the hardships were in those days. My father has told me that it cost him 19 rupees for a trip from Nagapattinam to Penang. 19 rupees by today's standards is 40 cents. You can't even get on the bus for that. But the fact is, in those days, it was 1.5 sterling pounds, or 1.5 sovereigns, or 12 grams. At today's price, $600 for a 7-day ship, no frills attached, and you do your own and mix with just a space enough for your own mat, if you had a mat. Otherwise, you've got to spread this out at the end of the day. Anyway, that's, as he came in 1913. I think from the estate in Johor, he settled in Singapore somewhere around 1920. My own recollections go back to 1928. And thank God I haven't got Alzheimer's yet. I can still remember a lot of these things. Now, as we see, the settlements are fairly clear. Indians, no matter what religion, are basically very religious. Whether you're a Hindu, or whether you're a Muslim, or whether you're a Christian, first thing you do is to give your thanks to God and set up, in the case of Hindus, some sort of a shrine somewhere. The anecdotal evidence is that the first one started in Singapore was the Sri Mariamman Temple in South Bridge Road. But the Chettiars, being more prosperous, had already set up the Tank Road Temple. So that was already a sort of a Indian habitat. When we come along further, in Orchard Road, there used to be a Sivan temple that's been relocated now. So that would have been part of, from the Tank Road Temple to the Sivan Temple would have been about 6 or 7 minutes walk. You had no other transport in those days, in fact. When you come from Orchard Road and you turn into Dhobi Ghat, that you could say is actually the beginning of the Indian settlement. Apparently, when Raffles came out here, he decided to set up ethnic settlements. And the west was given to Chinatown, where all the Chinese were located. And he even segregated them into dialect provinces. But for the Indians, all the way from Dhobi Ghat right up to Serangoon was part of the Indian settlement. Dhobi Ghat, I can remember quite distinctly. There were quite a few quarters, I'm not sure whether the buildings are still there, about 15 or 20 houses just next to where the cafe is. And at least 4 or 5 Indians stayed there. I believe my father, in his bachelor days, stayed in a bachelor's apartment where all of them got together. When you come along Dhobi Ghat, I remember as a small boy going to a sort of creche to a place called Ayurvedic Pharmacy. It was run by an Naidu, and his 2 daughters more or less taught me the ABCs of ABC and 1, 2, 3, etc. When you come on to Saligi Road, there's already Indian, most of them. From at the end of Turkras, there was in fact a Gurdwara. And surprisingly, when you come, there's another Gurdwara in Queen Street and another one in Wilkie Road. So there must have been a fairly wide group of people, of Sikhs also in that area. When you come along Saligi Road, you pass Middle Road, where, if I remember, there was a couple of Indian doctors, very well known. There's also a hairdressing saloon. And when you come, in fact, the Wilkie Road, Princep Street area was mostly Jewish. When you come on to Saligi Road and onto the corner, there's totally Indian. So the Ellison building is a sign that the Jews were there. Even today you go there, where Anandabhavan is there, you can see 1924 with the Star of David over there, which emphatically means that the time is there. There were a couple of coffee shops there. I've been to them in those days. You come over, cross into Serangoon Road, and there, at that time, there was a police station on the left, Kanagarwa police station. Opposite was Tekka Market. And then you had O. Ramsami's shop, which became later Pigo and Samili Pillai. All along was totally Indian. You could walk along, you knew that. Even today, the same flavor is there. When you come, the religious of the Indians is fairly well set out. You got 3 temples all along the way up to Perumal temple. In fact, even after that, Rumanskin, there used to be a Sivadurga temple, which has now been relocated to Kolamaya. And there is the mosque. At Short Street, there used to be a Tamil Methodist church. So inevitably, the whole area has always been Indian, although I don't think Raffles ever thought of having an enclave for that. In fact, I think having been from India, he must have thought that all Indians were the same. In fact, they are not. When you look at the facts, the immigration of Indians from India was basically only from 2 ports, one Madras and one Calcutta, both under the East India Company. So a very broad distinction in Singapore was either you are Bengali coming from Bengal, no matter what, even if you have a Sikh turban, or for those coming from south, loosely talked rather in a very denigratingly, Kaling. People say it's Kalinga, but to most of us it's the change, of the convicts who came and Rengling. Anyway, in Singapore that's a dispute because no more Malay being spoken, but across the border, when you go to Malaysia, you're still Kling. And in fact, our Rastali banana is Pisang Kling in Singapore. So anyway, these are the old roots. So when you look at it, Little India has always been an Indian enclave. And today it has become, as so many of the other speakers have said, become more commercialized, and probably the older group feel left out. I haven't gone to Little India for God knows how. In those days, there were barely 3 restaurants. Now every other shop is a restaurant. One reason could be because everybody once has to eat and nobody knows how to cook. So in addition, as a matter of fact, the whole road from Saligi Road right up to the end of Srangun, in fact, Pongol, I think could be said to be part of the Indian settlement. Because I remember there was a zoo right at the end, Pongol Zoo, which apparently was, thank you, called a zoo by Mr. Basappa. So, as we go along there, may I have the shift to the other one? Next. Oh, this is the end bit. Along the road to Srangun, as I said, between that and the zoo, we come to probably one of the most unique pictures you've got in Singapore. The Hindu cemetery was at Aljunied Road, it's crematorium and cemetery. It's unusual. I mean, everybody takes photographs at other occasions, but among the Hindus, I think it's unthinkable to have a photograph taken at the cemetery. My father died here in Singapore, where there was nobody else with him. And luckily, for the sake of history, his office mates thought of having the photographers come there and take photographs. This is a photograph of my father's cremation in 1948. As you can see, these are our own people from the community who did that. You go back to the other one. My father was really connected with all the people in Singapore, although he had virtually a very small education of himself. You can see all sorts of, the different ethnic people there. The only one missing I found are Jews, with whom he was very, very popular. And on thinking now, that could probably have been because for the Jews, it was on a Friday, for the Jews, Friday evening to Saturday evening, they will not do anything. That's probably the reason why not. So at the end of the day, this photograph is unique. And as I said, I've already cut down to my time. I have a lot of information to pass on. Anybody who's interested can contact me. Thank you all. Bye.
According to the census, Indian Muslim form between 17 to 20% of the Indian population. So if you base on, say, about 450,000, we are looking close to about 80,000 Indian Muslims in Singapore. Of course, the larger group among the Indian Muslim would be the Tamil-speaking Indian Muslims. So my topic would cover largely about the history of Tamil Muslims in Singapore. We have a sizable population of Malayalam-speaking, what we call the Malabar Muslims, and also we have Muslims from the other northern parts of India, Daudi Bohras, and all these are also considered as Muslims. So anybody from the Indian continent, be they be from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka even, they all considered as Indian Muslim for the sake of the census. So these are the modern-looking Indian Muslims. I will show you some older photograph. Next one, please. Okay, if you think of Indian Muslims, some icons will come out. Right? Mustafa Samsuddin is one of those famous ones. Of course, the mee goreng seller. If you go to any hawker center, the mee goreng seller would usually be an Indian Muslim. The teh tarik man would be an Indian Muslim. Even the triangular curry pots that is being sold, unlike the Malay curry pots, which are crescent in shape, are largely by the Indian Muslim bakeries, and they would be people from the North Indian Uttar Pradesh. The milkmen those days, they come in a cycle with a bag hanging with bottles clinging and all that. They would come from the Uttar Pradesh side. So we have Indian Muslims who were famous and skillful in various trades. The glaziers, those who were the frame makers, would have been Indian Muslims. So as Salma has already covered about the Indian Muslims in Penang, it's quite similar during the Strait settlement. Both Penang, Malacca, and Singapore played very important roles. With the advent of Islam in the 7th century, the spread to India, Islam spread to India, probably to Malabar coast first. So the Malabaris were one of the first few to become the Muslims in India, and subsequently with the invasion of the Turkish and Mughal emperors in northern India, and through Sufi saints, the spread of Islam to India became more formidable. And Muslims in the Malabar coast played very important trade routes. They were able to connect very well with the traders from the Islamic Middle Eastern region who were traveling through India, the western part towards China, and they were able to play a very important role. Likewise, from the Coromandel Coast, we have Indian Muslim traders coming to Southeast Asia and playing significant role. If you look at the history of Southeast Asia, as early as 12th century, there were big settlements of Indian Muslims in Kedah, in North Sumatra, Aceh, and so forth. But with the beginning of the Malacca Sultanate, if you look at the royal courts of the Malacca Sultanate, we find Indian Muslim, Tamil Muslims playing a very, they were kingmakers, in fact, in the royal courts. And Tamil was a language of economic importance then in the trade. So there are evidence of Tamil Muslims who were very powerful traders. And when the British tried to penetrate the Southeast Asian region, they had to use the Indian Muslim as their in-between go. And because they were very familiar with the culture and the language of the region, they played a very useful role, and that's how Islam came to Southeast Asia. All right, can you move on to the next slide? Now, these are the food that we usually associate Indian Muslim with. A lot of fusion food. If you look at the Indian rojak, a lot of the food items, you cannot find them in India itself. Mee goreng, for example, the mee itself. India, if you go to India, you don't find mee there. You have, of course, now the Maggi mee, the quick version coming in. And therefore, there are a lot of Indian spices mixed with the local dishes, and they have come out with their own unique food styles which can only be found. Murtabak is a very famous food that you can find plying along North Bridge Road. If you notice that they are now third generation, fourth generation Indian Muslims. And this is very unique. Indian Muslims, when they settle down in Singapore, some of them, they intermarried with the Malay community, and they become Jawi Peranakan. We find quite a number of Indian Muslims speak Malay solely rather than Tamil in their home. So there's a high percentage of that. And if you look at a good unique case, a lot of the Malabari Muslims would rather speak Malay at home than Malabar language, uniquely because of the intermarriage, all right? The mother is being a Malay, so you find Malay becomes the lingua franca in the home. Next one, please. All right, so the unique Teh Tarik man, the Roti Prata man in any coffee stall will be an Indian Muslim. Next one, please. All right, next slide. Okay, Indian Muslims in the early 19th century, from Kadayanallur and Tenkasi, they started coming. That's because of a few reasons. If you look at the coastal region, the Indian Muslims would be traders, largely traders. So we have the Marakkayas. They are Indian Muslims who actually originated from the Middle East region, and they are very good ship builders, the Marakkayas. The Rawatar were horse breeders. So when the Hindu kingdoms in India wanted to have horses in their kingdom, and they need people to look after the horses, the Rawatars came there, and therefore you have these different groups in India looking at different trades. In the early 19th century, the weavers, if you look at the heartland of India from Kadayanallur and Kerala side, the weaving business was affected because the British brought in the weaving machines. The cottage industry died, and there was a famine, and many of the people from Kadayanallur, Tenkasi had to force migrate themselves for better pastures elsewhere, and there was a wave of immigrants coming in. And many of them served as peon, Thambi workers in very menial jobs held by the British companies then. Next one, please. These are some of the weavers in India, back India. Next one. The hole in the wall kind of the mama stall. These are familiar trades. They were very efficient traders. They worked very hard. They spent hours in the shop. Simple, doesn't require much capital investment, but they were very skillful in business. And the mama stalls or the kaka stalls run by the Malayali Muslims were in every neighborhood estates. You will find plenty of them still functioning. All right, next one. The spice trade, where uniquely the Indian Muslim ladies played a complementary role to the husband who were working in very menial jobs. And if you go to any wet market, if you find those wet kind of spices, not the dried spices, wet spices, it would be usually run by Indian Muslim, even to a large extent now. Those days, every wet market along Theka and other various places, you will find Indian Muslim ladies selling spices, especially to the other non-ethnic groups, and they complemented the income of the families in Singapore. Next. These are the different groups of India, the Indian Muslims, and the trade they were polished in, or they were familiar with. So from Tanjavur and Travancore, you have a lot of Muslims, Malabari Muslims, and Ramanathapuram who were indulging in food business. Roti prata sellers, mee goreng sellers, murtaba sellers, and roja sellers, and so on. If you remember Bras Basar Road, the Waterloo Street, the famous Waterloo Street Rojak, they were run by people from this group. The Tiruvarur, they are the ones who run the Mama stall, the Malabar or spice and kaka shops, and the Gujaratis, textiles, and so forth. You can read for that. Can you next, please? Right, the Indian Muslims from Kadeno and Tengasi, they were unique because when they came here, they brought their families along and they settled in the Tanjung Pagar area, and they wanted to have education as one of the primary way of leveraging themselves as society. So Tamil education was very important. They built the Umar Pulavar Tamil High School then, the only school, secondary school in Singapore. And you can see Kadayanallur Street at Maxwell site. And from there, we have a lot of Tamil teachers who originated from Umar Pulavar Tamil High School, and now they are playing important role in the promotion of the Tamil language towards Singapore as school teachers and in various other establishments which require the services of Tamil. Okay, next one, please. All right, the Indian Muslims went on to then play a very important role in the shaping of the economy and citizenry of Singapore. Carry on. These are some of the Indian Muslims who have made a mark. You have Mr. Jalil, who is a philanthropist. The Mini Environment Services is one of those. Mr. James Ali is a prolific Tamil Muslim Indian writer. His works are highly recognized, and he has won the medallion, cultural medallion recently. Next, please. All right, a lot of early establishments. If you look at the CBD area, Central Business District area, the early buildings, Nagur Dargah, the Masjid Jamia Mosque, the Kuchipalli or Al Abrar Mosque, all this, despite being in a Chinatown where you have a lot of Chinese there, yet we find many of the buildings there were put up by Indian Muslims. So they must have been prosperous, wealthy merchants to have been able to raise these buildings. That's the indication. Next. All right, this is Nagur Dargah, the old time. Next, please. All right, this is the renovated building of Nagur Dargah. It has become an Indian Muslim Heritage Center for those. Okay, last few slides before I finish off, please. All right, carry on next. All right, this is a Malabar Muslim Jamaat Mosque where the Malabari Muslims. Any more? Okay, the challenges is Indian Muslims are unique. They are Indian, therefore they have a very close affinity to the Indian culture. They like to preserve the Tamil language and the culture by large. But there's a challenge where in homes where there's intermarriage, quite a number of the community have become assimilated, they have lost their culture, and that is going to be a challenge. But if you look at Sinda and Mandaki, as being Indian Muslims, they contribute to both the organization and the national level, and they're able to reap the benefits of both the national organization in uplifting the community. So being an Indian Muslim in Singapore is both beneficial, but challenges in preserving their culture and community by large. I think they become successful, and that's it. Thank you very much.